Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on a portrait that I drew a month ago or so. And yeah, she's one of my OCs. I designed her sometime back in 2021. And yeah, I hadn't done a watercolor portrait in a long time and I keep saying okay. I really wanted to do a watercolor portrait. I did a lot in 2020. And then I got off social media for about a year, I think. Maybe it was just a few months. Maybe that was the case. Okay. And then while I was off social media, I didn't paint as much. I mostly just sketched and drew. And now I want to get back into painting more finished illustrations. I have two paint pans out today, but both are the same brand. I will have a link below in the description for them. However, I do not end up using the smaller one. Right here I'm mixing a color for the background, which is like a brownish, reddish color, because I wanted it to have a kind of medievally look. And I wanted to have like paintbrush textures on the background instead of a nice clean wash. And I wasn't going to do a background to begin with, but I later decided that I did want to. The reason I didn't want to in the first place was because of what happened with the last background I did for a portrait, but this one turned out a lot differently, or better than the last one, thankfully. I'm also bringing some of the color into the actual portrait itself as kind of an underpainting. I thought it would help make the color scheme a little more cohesive. Right now I'm mixing a skin tone. Well, it's actually a very purpley color, which I use for the shadows of her skin. And I begin with a not a white wash, it's a wet wash over her skin first, so that when I put the actual paint on, it blends out smoothly and I don't have to use my brush to blend it out, because then I'd get harsher strokes. And since this is the skin, I wanted it to be more skin-like. And I know it can be done, skin can be done without the wet on wet method. I used to do it that way, but I've come to prefer this technique. And I suggest using a reference when drawing because it'll help you get the proportions accurate. And I didn't use a reference to draw the piece. I used one reference of a hood because I was having trouble with the shape of the hood on my character. But I sketched the whole thing without a reference, and then just as I'm beginning to paint, I'm thinking to myself, I should get a reference, because it is really going to help your art improve. It's gonna make a big difference. I've compared some of my art to when I use references to when I don't, and there's a big difference. So I pulled up that piece, the reference photo that came into the screen a little bit ago, to help me with the proportions in rendering of the skin. Alright, so the name of this original character that I designed is Ethelda, and she is part dwarf, part elf, half and half. And she is the heir to two different thrones, so the elves and dwarves don't get along, and her father is an elf, and her mother is a dwarf. And her mother has red hair, and her father has black, but I wanted her to have red hair, so she is short for an elf, but not as short as a dwarf, and she has freckles and such. So the elves have like nothing on their skin, it's all pure, no freckles or anything, and so she does carry freckles and blemishes and things like that. And she is kind of disowned by both kingdoms. It's kind of hard to explain, but her father and mother got married, but then both kingdoms, their parents wouldn't allow it, so they separated them. Something like that. I haven't figured out every detail yet, so she's pretty much on her own. She was put in the hands of someone else to raise her, and she's kind of like my last character I designed, like Asima Stalamark, only Asima is not for my books, that was for someone else's. But Ethelda here also is kind of a ranger. She's very similar to Asima Stalamark, but obviously she has a completely different story and stuff, yeah. Originally, she didn't have a sword on her back or the symbol on the side of her cloak, but after like a few weeks after I finished drawing it, I realized it was a little too symmetrical for my liking, and I wanted to add something to throw it off and add a little more difference to, unbalance it a little, and yet it still looks balanced. So the sword was an afterthought or idea, and so was the symbol on the side of her cloak, which I have not colored yet. But all of my old watercolor portraits used to be just watercolor, and I don't know how I discovered it or who I learned it from, but I realized the benefit and how much of a difference using colored pencils with watercolor really, like, what the difference it makes is pretty big. And when I compare it to my older pieces, I can definitely see a big difference, and I think part of that is just because I feel like I have more control when using colored pencils, whereas watercolor, I feel like I have less control, which it makes kind of sense because you're working with a wet medium, water, and colored pencils, you're working with a hard medium. You can control just about every stroke. And so it also helps me to be more free in using or choosing different colors. So after I'm done painting this portrait, I actually go in with colored pencils and add more vibrancy and color to the piece, because I felt like her skin lacked some color in certain areas, but I did not film it because it was getting long and my family was watching a movie and I didn't want to miss out, so I finished it while watching the movie with them. And unlike all the other times that I've done portraits, I for some reason decided to do the eyes right after finishing up the skin. Normally I don't do that. I don't know why I ever didn't do it, because they'd look like a ghost until the end, because it used to be the last thing I did. But I went in pretty much right away, I think, after painting the skin and did the eyes, and I feel like it just getting those eyes in right off the bat with the skin already helped boost my excitement about how the piece was going to turn out, how it was going, because I'd have to say this is probably one of my favorite portraits that I've done yet. And I have a few portraits like that. I will look back at some portraits and be like, I don't want these on my wall anymore. But then there is one portrait that I did when I was 13 that for some reason I still like, even though it could use so much improvement. I, for some reason, still love it. Like, I still have it on my wall, and yeah. So I don't know if I'll ever get over it. I even like it. I did a redraw 1 or 2 years later after painting it, and I still like the original better for some reason. Portraits in the past used to take me so long to paint. I would spend about 6 hours on one portrait, and now it takes me about half that time just because of my method and how it's changed. And I mean, watercolor, you're supposed to work from light to dark because you can't really work from dark to light. And that's true. But what I've done to make it go faster is work more quickly from light to dark. So I'll lay down the base tone, I'll put down shadows, and then I'll right away go in with the darkest. Maybe not quite the darkest right away, but pretty soon I'll go in with a really dark color that'll help get things moving, the rendering. And I think my process has been getting a lot quicker because of it. The colored pencils afterwards did take it a little while longer, but that's because I was watching something while I was working on it. So I'd say the colored pencil part probably took me about half an hour. So yeah. I wasn't originally gonna make this into a time-lapse video. I was just gonna do real time and then just clip and cut like crazy. But I did time-lapse, and the reason I didn't want to do time-lapse is because in the program that I'm using, it lags when I speed it up. And so when I voice over, what I'm saying isn't synchronized or at the right timing of the video footage. So if you've noticed that I'm not really talking about the piece or the process that much, it is because I can't. It lags so much that I cannot follow along with the time lapse and just talk about the process. So I apologize for that. I do want to find some way of fixing that. I have been experimenting with my setup lately, and I'm still working on lighting. Lighting is a tricky thing to work with. I have a really nice camera, but when I export it from the program, it lessens the quality, because if I export it in full quality, it will take way too long to export and render. So I still have some technical obstacles to figure out, but I do think it's getting better, so I'm pretty excited about that. If you guys have any video requests, or if you want to see me do a challenge, or if you have any questions, just leave a comment down below and I'll see what I can do. I love reading your guys' comments. You all are so supportive, and I'm really thankful to you for that. Feel free to use my work as inspiration, and if you want to copy it, you can, but if you post it, just remember to give credit where credit is due. And I'd love to see your work too. So if you draw my characters or anything, I'd love to see them. I have an email, so you can send them through there, or you can post them online. So yeah, feel free to do that. I am on Instagram and Pinterest, which I will have both of those links below for those, and also my website. I don't have prints up on there yet. I do hope to one day, maybe when I have a large enough audience. But I have one coloring page up there right now, and I have my YouTube videos up there and my portfolio. Also a little about one of my characters, Lady Amariah, so if you want to check that out, there's also that. Right here, I've gone back to the skin now with the brush, and I'm working on other areas also, doing last bits of rendering with the paint and details, getting in the final shadows and stuff. I used to stop with the brush, but I feel like the extra with the colored pencils really pulls and ties everything together. My process for portraits is usually one thing at a time, like the skin, the hair, whatever else there is that needs painted. I do the first layer of rendering, and then when I've finished all of it, I'll go over everything again all at once and work on everything, not spending too long in the same place, just moving about. Working on everything together. I do this so that all of the colors, the hues, and the values work well together as a whole, rather than just doing one thing at a time and then being done with it and not going back and working on it, making it go well with another part. Like her hair is red, so I put red on her skin in areas, and because her cloak is blue, I put blue on some of her, like in the shadows of her skin as well. So it's light bouncing off of her hair and cloak onto her face. And I feel like it just, again, ties everything together. Alright everyone, this is the day after finishing the painting with watercolor, and now I'm mixing up gouache for it. As you can see, I used colored pencils on the piece already the night before, and I feel like it makes a huge difference in just the whole piece altogether. I added more color to her cheeks and everything, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. So yeah. And yes, I'm using gouache to highlight her skin now, and I use it to highlight other areas as well. What I used to highlight her skin is not pure white, because I didn't want pure white. I mixed a very, very light skin tone and used that to highlight her skin. And then I mixed other colors for other parts of the portrait. There is one thing I don't really like about using colored pencils with my watercolor illustrations and portraits, and that is it leaves, because the paper is textured, it doesn't look very smooth, but that's because I use cold press paper. I really want to get some hot press paper. I feel like it would just work better with the stuff I do. Yeah. And it would bother me a lot more if I were selling originals, but because I will probably only sell prints in the future, I can go and scan the pieces and then digitally render them to get rid of the graininess and smooth things out, which is what I did with this finished piece. I went in digitally and smoothed it out. However, you don't want to go overboard with blending things because it will take away from the traditional look, and I really, really like the watercolor texture I get with traditional art. Man, I think one of my favorite parts about watercolor painting is the revealing of the clean, crisp edges. It's just so satisfying to watch, especially when they're really messy. And here it is. The paper is very warped, but that's what you get with watercolor in general. The better the paper quality, the less it will wrinkle. I will have the digitally edited version of this up on the screen for you guys to see at the end, because the camera does not do it justice. And here I am comparing it with an old piece of artwork that I did when I was 14, so that was 2 years ago. Man, so much improvement. And I thought the skin there was pretty good. It isn't actually bad. It is pretty good, but man, I feel like I've come a long ways. They've got a similar look. They're not the same character, but they've got a similar look. They're both straight on. Yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.